Joining us right now on Texans Radio, it's Nick Caserio, general manager of your Texans. And Nick, congratulations on the win, beating Jacksonville. Let's get to that and then get to what's happening down the stretch here in the 2021 campaign. Seemed like everybody pulled together very well. You had a lot of guys out, the guys hung together, and you got a much-needed win.
Yeah, really, it was a collective, I would say, team and kind of organizational effort. A lot of players who hadn't played very much during the year at any point really had the opportunity to play extensive snaps. Some, in fact, came down to a matter as late as Saturday, just finding out some of the results of some of the testing and some of the other things. But, collectively as a team, we were able to make some plays in all three phases of the game. We did enough to win. So we did more than Jacksonville did in the game. So it was, it's great to see. It's just really a credit and a tribute to the players and the coaches for the work and the effort that they put in. So it's always good to win on Sunday for as much time as everybody puts into it. So, it's good to win. And, we're turning the page here, getting ready for the Chargers.
Nick, there's so many challenges in this game of football, and I'm sure over the years we've seen them. But this one with COVID and the testing and the fact that you could find out Saturday evening or Sunday morning whether a guy is available or he's not. As far as challenges go, what you see in the NFL, where does this one sort of rank for you? And how much do you sort of relish it to see, hey, let's see if I can see a couple guys that maybe we haven't seen this year?
Yeah, I think it's a good perspective. I think it's a good reminder for all of us just to be very flexible. We got to be nimble, and we have to be willing to adapt sometime at a moment's notice. And that's really what the game is about. And when you look at the actual what happens during the course of a game, that's really what happens. You have to adapt. You have to adjust to what the conditions are in the game. For example, we had the rain. So now you correlate that to what happens outside of the football field in terms of your team construction, in terms of getting players ready to play. So it just reiterates the importance of everybody being ready to go during the course of the week, because you really never know when your opportunity is going to come. And we've talked at different points, throughout the year that practice squad it's an extension of your roster, and those players, they do everything that everybody else does during the course of the week, and they have to prepare as if they're going to play. And this was a really good example of that kind of coming to fruition.
Nick, take us through a couple of situations, because these are important in the development of these players. These young players are going to be around here for a while. Davis Mills, the offensive players, late in the first half, being able to get that field goal squeezed off before time expired, and also late in the game or later in the game when you're trying to play keep away or get that score to put it out of reach. Both those situations worked out well for the Texans.
Yeah. Really, a lot of games come down to situational execution and situational football and situational awareness. So at the end of the half, we were able to capitalize on I think we got the fourth down stop or whatever, however we got the ball back. Mm-hmm. So we're able to get the ball with decent field position, had the 3 timeouts. We managed the clock to the point where we could complete the pass, call timeout. The players were alert to the situation. So after the catch, Chris knew what he had to do. Everybody was alert, so we were able to get the timeout with whatever it was, 1 or 2 seconds left, and the field goal unit was able to go on to the field. And really, it comes down to the execution of the kick. So if you miss the field goal, it's kind of glass half full, half empty, if you will. Yeah. But, Kaimi was able to go out there in tough conditions and execute the kick. So it was a good team effort. And at the end of the game, the 4-minute situation, just being able to kind of control the ball a little bit, get some much-needed first downs, choose some clock, and then hit the big play there at the end. So collectively as a team, we were able to execute in a lot of the situational areas. Defensively, played well on third down and did a good job in the red area. So when you look at red zone, third down, 2-minute, 4-minute, those situations, we had the advantage and we took advantage of our opportunities, and the end result was the victory.
Nick, so few times do we see a kick returner take one 98 yards to the house. In fact, being on the sideline since 2014, I think the last time I saw one was, 2016 in a playoff game against a team you knew very well at the time. Tremont gets one on Sunday from 7-3 to 14-3. A, what kind of change does that make in the game when he takes that to the house? And B, you re-upped with Tremont. I asked you about that a couple weeks ago. It seems to be paying off, but he had a tremendous day on special teams. How valuable was that to the win on Sunday as well?
Yeah, no question. Tremont has worked hard. I would say anytime you have the opportunity to score either defensively or in the kicking game, it's an added bonus. So those are kind of additional points, if you will. It's additional possession, if you will. offensively. But in terms of the execution of that return, it was very well blocked. We had a lot of good efforts from a number of players. The double team was well executed. Royce was able to lead up inside, and then Chris kind of wheeled around there a little bit. So he kind of had a little bit of a convoy down the sideline. But really, it was good running at the point of attack, because about the 30-ish, 35-yard line, there were 3 or 4 Jaguars that had the opportunity to tackle Tremon, and he was able to keep his balance. And then once he squirted through, then his speed took over. So it was good overall execution. It was well blocked. Matter of fact, the other return almost had an opportunity to pop as well. We bounced it outside. So the return team has worked hard. Frank's worked hard with the return team. So, it's always good to see when that effort is rewarded, with a touchdown or with a positive play. So Tremon's worked hard from the day that he arrived here. He's had a good attitude. And in addition to the kickoff return, he had 1 or 2 tackles on the coverage units as well. And matter of fact, on the following kickoff after the touchdown, he was on the kickoff coverage unit. So Tremon's worked hard. He's created a good role for himself. And the bottom line is comes down to execute whatever your job is. And he's been able to do that. So it's a credit to him. It's a credit to the coaching staff as well.
Nick, it's notable that you played at Buffalo. It was a deluge, and that did not go well. But you played in Nashville. It was a deluge. That did go well, and it was raining a lot in Jacksonville. That went well as well. So when you look back on a season like this, or in particular games, or what players do in certain situations, do you take that kind of thing into account, the weather conditions, and how do you track that sort of thing? Because, for instance, the Patriots playing Buffalo a couple of weeks ago, and it was windy and they ran the ball like crazy and they only threw it 3 times. They got to look back on that and say, well, remember the conditions. So how do you take all that into account?
Yeah. We understand the environment for, call it 8 to 10 of our games. The home games and the AFC South are going to be in a fairly controlled environment, and there's going to be games where we're going to have to deal with and play with the elements. So I think you just adjust and adapt to whatever the situation is. And maybe you have a little bit more focus and concentration. I mean, ball security, anytime the weather is inclement, anytime the ball is wet, there's certain things that you have to make sure that you do. The passing game is you have to adjust the passing game a little bit, or there's certain routes that you call or certain plays that, you're going to be able to execute in those conditions. So I think it's having an awareness and understanding of the conditions, but also realize you're still trying to play the opponent. It's not about the weather, but you have to understand the weather and the conditions that you're playing in. And if there's adjustments that you have to make as a team, then you just have to make sure your team understands why it's important. And maybe you're just a little bit more conscious of doing the little things and taking care of the football, a little bit more diligently.
Nick, we may have touched on this last week a little bit because he got in the game with some injuries and some things going on at linebacker, and that's Garrett Wallow. Number one, I heard this maybe 3 times yesterday on radio, and I thought I was just going to die. They kept calling him undersized. I see Garrett every day. He doesn't look undersized to me. But the one other thing is, boy, he gets to the football quickly. What did you think of a full 60 minutes of seeing Garrett on Sunday?
Yeah, there was a lot of players defensively that, were very active. I'd say Garrett was one of them. Neville played well. Tavier had a good game. Garrett has really improved and grown over the course of the year. It's an interesting observation. I think most linebackers, I'd say the average linebacker, give or take, it's going to be anywhere from 6 foot to 230, 235 pounds. There's some teams that play with bigger linebackers, so that maybe extends the curve a little bit. And you might have this concept of like what a bigger linebacker is. I think when you look at maybe historically and what the Texans have played with, system and the front structure is a little bit different. So there was a little bit different emphasis on the type of player, whether it was BMAC, those types of players. So as we've kind of transitioned a little bit schematically, so the points of emphasis maybe a little bit different of what it's all about what you're going to ask that player to do. So, I mean, Levante David, I don't think anybody would say that he's very big, but he's one of the best linebackers in the league. So, I mean, he's barely 6 foot. I don't know, is he 220 pounds? But he's very instinctive. He runs well. He's tough as hell. So, linebacker is about being instinctive and however fast or big you are, being able to use those attributes to your advantage. So say Garrett's a pretty instinctive player. He runs well for his size. I'd say he's strong for his size, but, I think it's a matter of like the lens through which you view it and what you're asking that player to do.
Nick, it's number discrimination, isn't it? I mean, the 32 just slims him down. I mean, you put a 50 something on him, it's going to be a completely different look, right? I mean, isn't that happens? No comment.
We'll see a big linebacker next week in 54 for the Niners. So maybe he fits the size requirement.
But this is not just a Texans thing. It's a league evolution thing in a way, right? Like when you got to the Patriots, weren't they really big? The linebackers, Ted Johnson and those guys. And we know Ted well from his 6'10" days. But that's been a thing in this league, right? As linebackers have to cover more. Is that a situation that's happening?
Yeah, I think the league has evolved. I think the way teams play offensively has evolved. So defensively, you have to be able to combat. We talked about this a few weeks ago. You have to maybe be able to defend a little bit more space and be able to play both vertically and horizontally. But by the same token, when you look at, you alluded to, Marc, the Buffalo New England game, whether it was, however many runs there were. Mm-hmm. And then even watching the Colts game from the other night, I mean, they ran the ball effectively and in the end. So I think whatever your size is, it comes down to, I'd say, body position, hand placement, leverage, and then instinctiveness. So however you use your size and however big you are, however you use it to your advantage, like that's the most important thing. And defensively, ultimately the goal is to get the player on the ground. So however you can get that player on the ground from a tackling standpoint, that's the most important thing. How you're going to defeat a block or play a block, whether it's, if you have Quentin Nelson running directly downhill at Garrett Wallow, it's not going to be a good matchup. But if you have him in a 2-eye or a 3 technique, or the front kind of helps you protect the linebacker a little bit, then maybe it gives him the opportunity to have a little bit more space and be able to make that play where the size isn't as important. So, I mean, Teddy Bruschi wasn't the biggest linebacker, 6'1", 230 pounds, but he played strong for size. So it's really about, like, how do you use your size to your advantage? And it comes down to, again, body positioning, hand placement, playing with good leverage, playing with good knee bend. I know it sounds pretty simple, but the ultimately, regardless of how big or small you are, that's what football comes down to.
Nick, I'm using Garrett as an example, but it's more a broader picture. Garrett played high school at John Curtis High School. It's a famed high school, one of the greatest high school coaches, Johnny Curtis there. Then he goes to TCU and plays for Gary Patterson. How much does his background, who coached a player, who was around a player, how much does that matter as you're doing evaluations of young guys coming into the NFL?
Sure, it's important. When you look at some of the, better defense, I mean, Coach Patterson has been, as good a defensive coach as there is in college football, even going back to his days at Pittsburgh State. So whenever you're evaluating a player, you're always looking at whatever information that you have accessible. So how are they coached? What system are they playing in? And a lot of times what we have to figure out is, what are they actually being asked to do? So, because you're watching and you might see something, but you don't really have a global understanding of what that player is being asked to do. So as you go through your evaluation process, you can do a little bit deeper dive. So, but it's certainly a part of the process, John. There's no question about it. Because you're taking the player in totality. So, how they absorb information, the intricacies of the system, how many adjustments they're asked of that player. So there's so much that goes into it, but anything in the player's background can certainly help create a picture of what we're receiving in the player.
Nick, you have the Chargers coming up here, and this is a team that's fighting for the playoffs, and they've got a lot going for themselves. They've got Justin Herbert, and I know he's kind of the focus when fans and media look at this team, but there's so much more than that. What do you make of them?
Yeah, I would say the word that comes to mind with them is explosive. Herbert's as good of a quarterback as there is in the league. So he's big, he's strong, he's fast, he's athletic. He has a rocket for an arm. I think they're among the top 10 and they're pretty close to a top 10 or 15 and 20 plus throws. Keenan Allen is as good a receiver as there is in the league. He kind of gets lost in the shuffle, but it's consistent a player. I think he's like the first or second most targeted player on third down in the league. And then Mike Williams is big. He's fast. He makes a bunch of explosive plays down the field. And Eckler, I mean, depending on his situation, I think I read something yesterday, potentially could be on the COVID list, but I think over the last 3 years, he leads the league in running backs and receptions, yards, and targets. So you're talking about a multi-purpose threat. So they got a lot of good players offensively, and then defensively, it starts with Bosa. I mean, he's as good as any defensive player in the league. Tillery's a good inside player, kind of 3 to 5 technique, has really good size, has good length. Pretty instinctive linebackers. Again, this is interesting, actually, going back to the Waller discussion, John. So when you look at White and Tranquil, they're 2 starting inside linebackers. They both were former safeties. So they played safety, not necessarily. Tranquil played safety early in his career at Notre Dame. They're going to high school. They transitioned him to linebacker. And then White actually played safety at West Virginia and he's transitioned to playing will linebacker. So just going back to kind of what we're talking about, size of linebacker, and then Derwin James is as versatile and as good of a defensive player as there is in the league. They play him at safety, they play him at star, they play him at money and dime. 6'1", 205 pounds. I mean, athletic, runs well. So they're a very, I would say, explosive team with a lot of talented players. And Brandon's come in and done a good job of sort of putting his stamp on what they're doing defensively. And then Coach Lombardi offensively has done a nice job at taking some of the concepts that they used in New Orleans and really kind of fitting, not necessarily those concepts at Justin, but trying to figure out what Justin does well, which is a lot. And then, they have an offense they put together that makes it hard to defend. And then Darius has done a good job in a kicking game. Darius Swinton, the special teams coordinator, has done a good job in a kicking game. They got a good core group. So, I mean, they're 8-6 or whatever their record is for a reason. They're a good football team, and they've beaten some good teams. They've been in a lot of close games. So, it's certainly a big challenge in front of us here on Sunday.
Nick, one more for you. We're doing the player show with Jonathan Owens this week. So help me with my homework. Give me a little Jonathan Owens tidbit, story, anecdote, whatever you got on Jonathan Owens that could help me out here.
I don't know if I have a tidbit or anecdote, but I would say actually going back to, when I first arrived here back in January, February, we were kind of going through our player evaluations. And when you look at, I would say, some of the work that Jonathan has done in the weight room, strength and development, like I would say his explosiveness, his speed, his strength was as good as any defensive back that we had on the roster. So he's had the athletic attributes. More than anything, it's probably about experience, just having the opportunity to play. So Jonathan's had a great attitude. He's worked hard since the day we arrived. He's kind of waited his time. He kind of bided his time here a little bit, and he had an opportunity and went out there and took advantage of it. So it's a credit to him and his kind of his stick-to-itiveness, and his just work ethic and his mindset. And, hopefully that continues here moving forward. We'll let you sneak another one in, John. I know you were trying to chime in there. So.
Oh, no, when you mentioned Brandon Staley, the fact that you didn't mention John Carroll at all, I thought was a big loss. I mean, come on, man. I mean, you had the perfect opportunity to kind of put it out there and boast a little bit.
Well, he's not a John Carroll grad technically. So he just coached at John Carroll for 3 years. So, I mean, but he's gone from being Division III defensive coordinator to being the head coach of the Chargers. So, Brandon's a good coach. He's a smart kid. He works hard, and, he's done a good job here in the early part of the season. No question.
Nick, Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Thanks so much for the time. Good luck this week against the Chargers.
Same to you guys. Take care.